The idea of eating human flesh strikes a deep, primal chord of revulsion in most of us. It's the ultimate taboo, a line that separates civilization from savagery. But what if you could try it without anyone being harmed? This isn't a survival scenario on a remote mountain. It's a question posed by modern science. Before we can even begin to think about the future of food, we have to look back at the dark and complex history of cannibalism. For thousands of years, humans have consumed other humans for reasons that are far more varied than simple hunger. It's a practice woven into the fabric of our history, touching on survival, ritual, medicine, and madness, forcing us to confront the very limits of what we consider acceptable. Throughout history, the reasons for cannibalism can be sorted into a few grim categories. The most understandable, perhaps, is nutritional cannibalism, eating others simply to stay alive. Think of the infamous Donner Party, trapped by snow in the Sierra Nevada mountains in 1846, or the survivors of the 1972 Andes flight disaster. In these extreme situations, the rules of society break down, and the instinct for survival takes over completely. These weren't monsters. They were ordinary people pushed to an unimaginable edge. Famines in places like Russia and China during the 20th century also saw desperate people resort to cannibalism, a stark reminder that when order collapses, survival becomes the only law that matters. But survival is only one part of the story. Ritual cannibalism is a much more complex phenomenon, often tied to culture, religion, and power. Some societies practiced exocannibalism, consuming their enemies to absorb their strength or to display dominance, as some stories about ancient Aztec rituals suggest. Others, like the Fore people of Papua New Guinea, practiced endocannibalism, where they consumed their own deceased relatives as part of a funeral rite. For the Fore, this was an act of love and mourning, a way to keep the spirit of the loved one within the community. It was a deeply meaningful practice, but one that came with a terrible, unforeseen consequence: the spread of a deadly disease called kuru. Finally, there are the darkest corners of this history: pathological and medicinal cannibalism. The first is the kind we associate with serial killers like Jeffrey Dahmer, driven by severe mental illness and twisted fantasies. This is cannibalism as an act of ultimate control and depravity, a world away from the desperate acts of survivors. Yet strangely, another form existed in mainstream society. In 16th and 17th century Europe, medicinal cannibalism was surprisingly common. Doctors prescribed remedies made from human bone, fat, and blood to treat everything from epilepsy to headaches. Even the 1797 edition of Encyclopaedia Britannica listed mummy, ground-up ancient Egyptian remains, as a legitimate medicinal substance, showing how cultural norms can shift dramatically over time. So, how do we get from a gruesome history of survival and ritual to a sterile laboratory setting? The answer lies in cellular agriculture, the same technology that's bringing us lab-grown beef, chicken, and fish. The process for creating cultivated human meat would be nearly identical. It begins with a harmless cell donation, something as simple as a cheek swab from a consenting adult. Those cells, known as stem cells, are the body's master building blocks. They're placed in a bioreactor, which is essentially a high-tech fermenting tank that provides all the warmth, oxygen, and nutrients, like amino acids, sugars, and fats, that the cells need to thrive and multiply, just as they would inside a body. Over several weeks, these cells proliferate, growing and differentiating into muscle and fat tissue. They are encouraged to merge and form into thin strands of muscle fiber, which are then layered together to create a more substantial piece of what is, biologically speaking, real meat. The entire process is sterile, controlled, and completely detached from the person who donated the cells. Crucially, this method sidesteps the most significant danger associated with traditional cannibalism: disease transmission. Prion diseases like Kuru, which devastated the Fore people, spread through the consumption of infected brain tissue. In a lab, the initial cells can be screened for any pathogens, ensuring the final product is completely safe and disease-free. This technology makes it possible for the first time in history to separate the act of eating human meat from the act of violence, death, or desecration. No one has to die, no one is exploited. The meat is not harvested from a cadaver, but grown from a few cells given freely. This fundamentally changes the ethical equation. The arguments against historical cannibalism, that it involves murder, that it spreads disease, that it's a product of desperation or madness, simply do not apply here. We are left with the pure concept itself, stripped of all its historical baggage. The question is no longer about harm, but about the idea itself. The potential applications, though niche, are intriguing. Some have suggested it could become an avant-garde culinary experience, the ultimate in personalized dining. Imagine a haute cuisine restaurant offering celebrity cubes grown from the cells of famous actors or athletes. Others envision more intimate rituals, such as newlyweds consuming a small piece of meat grown from each other's cells as a symbol of their union. While these ideas may seem bizarre, they highlight how this technology could be used for symbolic purposes. It would be an expensive, highly specialized product, not something you'd find in the supermarket, but it represents a frontier where science and culture collide in a very personal way. Even if lab-grown human meat is proven to be perfectly safe, sterile, and ethically sourced, one colossal barrier remains: the yuck factor. This is that immediate gut-level feeling of disgust that overrides any logical argument. It's an emotional response, not a rational one. The thought of eating something that is biologically human, no matter how it was produced, triggers a deep-seated revulsion in most people. This isn't just a matter of taste. It's a powerful cultural and psychological taboo that is ingrained in us from a very young age. We are taught that the human body is sacred, something to be respected and buried, not consumed. This feeling is a formidable obstacle for any potential market. Recent surveys reveal just how divided public opinion is on this subject. A 2024 YouGov poll in the United Kingdom, for instance, found that while an overwhelming majority believe lab-grown human meat should not be legal, a surprising 1 in 5 Britons admitted they would be curious enough to try it if it were available. Interestingly, the curiosity was higher among men, 1 in 4, than women, who were at 15%, and younger generations were more open to the idea. This suggests that while disgust is the dominant reaction, a significant minority is driven by curiosity, novelty, or perhaps a desire to push boundaries. The market, if one ever existed, would be incredibly niche. The comparison to the broader cultivated meat industry is telling. As of 2025, lab-grown animal meat is only legal for sale in a few countries like the United States, Singapore, and Israel, and it already faces significant public skepticism and regulatory hurdles. Some places, like Italy and the state of Florida, have even preemptively banned it. If getting people to accept a lab-grown chicken nugget is this difficult, convincing them to try a lab-grown human morsel is a monumental challenge. The main drivers for cultivated animal meat, animal welfare and environmental sustainability don't apply in the same way to human meat, leaving only novelty and philosophical curiosity as potential selling points. Ultimately, this visceral reaction may be too powerful to overcome on a mass scale. The taboo against cannibalism is one of the most universal in human culture. It's tied to our concepts of identity, mortality, and what it means to be human. Even if our rational brain understands that no one was harmed, our emotional brain screams that something is profoundly wrong. It's the same feeling that makes us recoil from the idea of drinking recycled toilet water, even if we know it's purer than tap water. Logic can only go so far when it's up against centuries of ingrained cultural programming and a powerful, instinctive yuck. From a purely bioethical standpoint, the case for lab-grown human meat is surprisingly straightforward. Experts like bioethicist Dr. John Loic point out that if there is no harm, there is no ethical foul. The donor consents, the process is safe, and no one is exploited. Our society already accepts the commodification of the human body in various forms. We buy and sell blood, sperm, eggs, and surrogate pregnancies. If these practices are ethically permissible, then it becomes difficult to argue that growing cells from a cheek swab is somehow a step too far. The ethical objections tied to traditional cannibalism, such as murder and desecration, are completely absent here. However, moving beyond the question of direct harm, opens up a more complex moral landscape. What would it mean for a society to normalize this practice, even on a small scale? Critics worry that it could lead to a further cheapening of the human form, eroding the sense of sanctity and respect we hold for our bodies. Could it create a bizarre market where the cells of the rich and famous become a luxury commodity? The idea of eating a steak grown from your favorite celebrity might sound like a joke, but it raises unsettling questions about objectification and consumerism. It blurs the line between appreciating a person and literally consuming their biological essence. Furthermore, we must consider the potential for unforeseen social consequences. How would different cultures and religions react? For many, the human body is considered sacred, a vessel for the soul, and the idea of consuming it in any form would be seen as a grave transgression, regardless of its origins. Legalizing it could spark intense cultural and religious backlash. There is also the risk of it being used for exploitative purposes, even with consent. Imagine a scenario where impoverished individuals are coerced into selling their cells for a pittance. The ethical framework must be incredibly robust to prevent such a marketplace from emerging on the fringes of society. In the end, the future of lab-grown human meat will likely be decided not in a lab or by an ethics committee, but in the court of public opinion. While it may be technically feasible and ethically defensible in a narrow sense, it remains a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. Unlike cultivated animal meat, it doesn't promise to save the planet or end animal suffering. Its only purpose is to satisfy a morbid curiosity or serve as an extreme form of symbolic expression. For now, it remains a fascinating thought experiment, a testament to scientific capability. But it's a meal that most of humanity will, for the foreseeable future, be content to leave off the menu.